Hello, hello. Welcome to Pod Stories. This week we are talking to Darren Marlar, who is the host of Weird Darkness. And today we're going to be talking all about how you can create your community, build your community, because Darren has a really cool community of weirdos, as he calls them. And so today we're going to be talking to Darren all about how he created his community of weirdos and maybe some tips and tricks on how other podcasters out there can create their own community. And welcome, Darren.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I've seen your beautiful face in meetings and on YouTube and everything else. It's nice to finally actually get to talk to you face to face,
No,
which is
I'm
really
super excited.
more beautiful in person, I see. Oh
Thank
yeah,
you very much.
and you're attractive too. Um, yeah, I'm just kidding. Yeah,
No.
it's great. I'm really happy to be here. So
Me too. I mean, I think that there is so many things we can talk about, a lot of things we can unpack. But the first thing that I kind of really want to do is I want to have a little bit of a conversation about your podcast, story, why you started, when you started. And I think it's super interesting because you started on YouTube and
yeah,
then you went away from YouTube and you realized that you actually were growing at a faster rate when you started doing audio only
yeah.
than when you were on YouTube. And I think that's really cool. And maybe we can start with that.
Sure. Yes. The podcast started in technically in October of 2015. And the video, the YouTube version started in October 2015. And the only reason that I really even started it at all is just because I wanted a creative outlet. I've always been a creative person. Always been an actor, always been on stage in some way, shape, or form, or either acting or doing music. I even did stand-up comedy for about 10 years. I just enjoy performing and entertaining people. And I found myself in a job which was very, very good to me. And they're still very, very good to me, but there's really no creative aspect to it. And I found myself kind of dying on the inside because I just wasn't doing anything fun and creative the way that I would want to do it. So I saw a couple other people on YouTube doing story channels, creepy stories and stuff like that, and everybody knows who they are, so I don't have to mention them. But I just watched a couple of those, and I thought, you know what, that's kind of interesting. And those, and even in those situations, even though it was on YouTube, they weren't really doing a lot of visuals. It was mostly just audio with maybe a static image on the video just to have something to look at. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I could do that, but I didn't want to do just a static image because I thought that's kind of boring. So I actually did start creating the actual videos. I'd go out online and find the photos that I thought would work with the story, and I probably used a bunch of them that were probably wrong legally, like with copyright laws and stuff. I wasn't really thinking that way at the time. I'm a lot more wary of it now, and I try to do things right. But at the time, I just wasn't really thinking. But I got a bit of a following, but it wasn't very good. I've been doing YouTube for a long time before that, when I would post some stand-up comedy videos of stuff that I had performed, or I had something called the Daily Dose of Weird News. That's actually where the weird things came in first, actually. The Daily Dose of Weird News, something that I kind of pulled over from my radio show back when I did do a creative radio show. And so I started creating those, and every day I just come up with some funny news items, make punchline jokes to every story, that type of thing. Um, and then when I decided, you know what, I'm going to try that storytelling thing with the creepy stories. I wanted to keep the weird brand. Branding has always been a thing with me. I think it's just because of radio. So I thought, okay, if I've got weird news, what can I do that would be with the strange and macabre stories that would kind of go with the weird? And somehow Weird Darkness came up. Well, once I had those two both going at the same time, it just made sense to continue with that trend. So now, if I ever do a promo code for something, the promo code is weird. And I did just on a couple of occasions decided to call my listeners weirdos just to see what would happen. And they ran with it. Uh, I
Mhm.
was just having fun. It was just it was one of those flippant remarks that I really didn't think much of. The next day would have been, "Hey, folks, how's it going?" Or "Hey, gang, how's it going, family?" But just a couple times I said, "Hey, weirdos," and that was it. Uh, on Facebook, they started saying they call themselves weirdos. I get memes all the time now that people posting saying, "We are the weirdos, Mister. We love being weird. Weird is better than being real." It's all just anything and everything weird or weirdo. People find and they post it, and they've claimed it. Very, I think once in the how many years I've been doing this now? 6 years? No, six, almost 7 years. However long it's been. You can tell math is really my strong suit. But the whole time I've been doing it, I think only once has anybody said, "I find weirdo kind of offensive." Only once, and they just didn't understand. They were new, and I'm sure after listening for a while, they kind of got it, and they realized, oh, okay, kind of like Rush Limbaugh calling people ditto heads, stuff like that. It sounds kind of dumb at first, but then
Yeah.
once you understand the concept or the context of it, then someone say, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. All right, yeah, I can gravitate towards that. Yeah, I resemble that remark. And they go from there.
I think it's really important when you brought up the point of branding, because it's something that I repeat over and over. What we say in Spreaker is that you need to create a brand. Your podcast is your brand, and you really need to understand how to create that. And I
Mhm.
mean, I think that what you did is amazing, that now your community is self-identifying themselves as weirdos. They believe, they feel like they're weirdos, and they when they say that, they feel like they're a part of your community, of your
Family.
podcast, and they really identify
Yeah.
themselves with that. And I think that's like the best thing, that the best outcome of creating a community, when people have like kind of dubbed themselves, this loyal community of weirdos.
Yeah.
Uh, but maybe we can talk little bit about how did you start building that community, or where did that, like what were some of the first steps that you took when you started podcasting, to create that community, to build that community?
Um, yeah, at first, of course, just like with anything, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook for the podcast. By the time I started Weird Darkness, I didn't have those, but I did have my own personal page, the Darren Marlar page and the Darren Marlar Twitter. And I created those again previously because of everything else that I was doing. It wasn't out of being narcissistic or anything. It was just another branding platform. So I was doing the daily dose of weird news there, and I was posting anything and everything, coming up with jokes and just like anything that happens on Facebook with whatever people want to post. I just made a page for it rather than my profile. And that did fairly well. But once Weird Darkness came up, I realized I want a separate entity for that, because even though it's still me and what I'm creating, not everybody's going to like what I posted on my Darren Marlar page. So I'm going to create the Weird Darkness page specifically for that content, for that genre. And so at first it was just a page, a Facebook page. And as I posted things there and they started getting shares, because I would also post them on my my personal Darren Marlar Facebook page, as well as my profile, as well as on Twitter and everywhere else. And I worked really hard to push that particular page. Um, and in fact, one of the few things that did work in the beginning, it doesn't seem to work all that much anymore, is I actually paid for promotion on Facebook for that page. It was mostly just for people, because I targeted specific things, or target words, keywords, like horror or true crime or that kind of thing, and just kind of spread the word a little bit about that. Uh, but I didn't feel the community with it, because on a Facebook page, even though you can see the comments and reply to them, there wasn't really the activity that I was hoping for. And the page is still growing very well. I think this has like 26,000 on the Facebook page, which is still amazing to me that not many people would actually want to follow it on the page. But I decided to create the group, and put it up there so people could give me their own ideas. or just interact with me, because I know from experience that is important. Again, with the radio thing, emailing people back and forth on a regular basis, going out and meeting people one-on-one when we went out and did on-location remotes. I understand that meeting people and getting and like shaking hands with them is important. Well, you can't do that with a podcast worldwide, so the group was the better way to do that. And it just started growing. People started sharing what I was posting there. It really helped that I was very engaged. It's not just something that you set up and then walk away from. I go in on a regular basis and I will like something, love something, comment on somebody's post. And that way they know I'm a real person, that I do care. And it kind of gives them that special feeling, kind of like, hey, a celebrity just liked my post or just commented. Even though I don't consider myself a celebrity in any way, shape, or form, I think that just that extra touch is what makes a huge difference. Um, Plus, I also
Yeah.
have the mental health issue of it as well, which I think a lot of people sort of gravitating towards as well, which we can talk about a little bit later on. But I think that has helped as well, because people sort of take ownership of that too.
So why don't we go? I would love to talk about that as well, the mental health issue. But let's focus maybe on the Facebook group in terms of when did you start the Facebook group? How long did it take you? Because let's talk about numbers. Because today that Facebook
Oh,
group has over 100,000 members in it. But when
yeah.
people see that, they probably think, oh, they always see the outcome and the success, but they don't see the work behind that. So let's talk about how long did it take you to actually build that community? And when you say, you're fairly active, what does that mean? Does that mean how much time did you spend on it to build that? And let's look at some of the numbers and some of that time spent there, so we can see the
Yeah.
work and just not the outcome.
That's too bad. I kind of like just showing the outcome and then just letting people think, wow, he's awesome. And then just leave it at that. Um, it took a lot of work
Yeah.
in that group. And it really didn't explode in popularity until the last couple of years. Before that, it was like pulling teeth trying to get people to go to the group, to post, to just to get involved. Originally, of course, just like everybody else, it was just my friends and family that went over there and got involved. It was just one more area for us to gather, I guess, for lack of better words.
Mhm.
Um, but I pushed it so hard in the podcast, saying, "Hey, join the group. We got this brand new group. It's really
Mhm.
awesome." Um, and I would also share that the group exists in other social media, not just Facebook. I'd tell people on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on MeWe, on Minds.com, and wherever else I was at the time, and
So
say,
you
"Hey,
were like everywhere. You were trying to go every single
I
place to be able to
yeah,
push your
and
podcast.
yeah, and I still do for to some extent, but really I've learned, and I've heard others say it, you really need to concentrate on just like one or two socials if you really want to do anything good with them. If
That's
you
what we
really
advocate as well.
Yeah, but you can't do it all.
Yeah.
And I have recently hired out. I've actually gone to others outside, say, hey, can you find content for the Weird Darkness page? They're not involved with the group, but
Mhm.
just so I have content there. So it's not just me saying, hey, here's my new episode. Hey, here's my new episode. Hey, here's my new episode. People are going to get turned away with that.
Can
Um,
we just stop on that really
yeah.
quickly? Because I think that's such a good point. Because what I'm seeing with a lot of podcasters out there is that they are just going into groups or they're joining groups and they're just putting links of their latest podcast. They're not
Mhm.
interacting, they're not engaging, they're not starting a conversation. They're just kind of putting out, here's my new episode. Here, listen here, listen here, listen here. We
Right.
get that a lot in our Facebook group as well. And I see it a lot. And I think that what people are not really realizing is that it's not a one-way conversation. It's not just you putting, your episode out there, but it's also trying to get people to engage, putting out content that's maybe not directly an episode, having a conversation with people, and spending that time. And I think that a lot of people are not making that effort.
Yeah, you need to build trust.
Yeah.
And if all you're doing is knocking on somebody's door and trying to sell them a vacuum, and that's the only time that they see you, then they're not going to want to open the door for you. But if you're showing up and saying, "Hey, you know what? Here's some free tickets to this concert that I found," or here's a you know welcome to the neighborhood. Here's a fruitcake, or not a fruitcake because nobody likes fruitcake, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a reason for them to follow you other than just there's their podcast. Um, Bring in in fact, I think what really has helped is sort of bringing in some of my own personality. So I have a natural sense of humor for something. So even though it might be dark content, I'll still put a little bit of humor into it when I post something.
Mhm.
If I find some memes that are kind of creepy but also funny at the same time, I'll post those. Um, and also just my own personal thoughts. Just once in a while, just kind of like what people do with Twitter when you
Yeah.
keep it down to, I guess now it's 280 characters. um, keep it short like that on Facebook and just throw up a photo with it, just saying, "Hey, you know what? I thought of this today, and it's kind of odd. What do y'all think?" And just leave it at that. And
Yeah.
again, it's an open conversation. It's not something that they can just see and then maybe click on. You're actually asking for engagement with that particular question or that comment or whatever. I think that helps quite a bit.
So for example, you gave a couple of great examples. So instead of just putting a link to your latest episode, you can ask a question, you can create a meme and share a meme. What is
Mhm.
some other content that you have been sharing with your community to get them more engaged, to have, that more of that trust, to build that trust?
Um, I do things that are outside of the podcast as well. There's
Okay.
something called my Weirdo Watch Party where once a month we all get together, and on my website we watch a terrible B horror movie, which is hosted by a horror host. Horror hosts are still a thing. They're everywhere. And so I've kind of teamed up with the Monster Channel. They're the ones that provide the stream. And once a month, we just say, "Hey, we're going to meet at this time. We're all going to watch this together." There's a chat room there, so we can all make stupid comments about what we're watching and how bad the acting is and the sets and everything else. And that ends up being a lot of fun. And I've heard that we get, even though the chat room itself might be less than 25 or 30 people, I know that there are hundreds watching because I'm told the numbers later by the folks that run the channel. So I know that people are actually watching. And it's not the podcast. I'll promote it in the podcast, obviously, but it's not specifically just the podcast.
That's
Something
really
else,
outside the box.
right? Well, yeah. Um, it's just trying to give people something fun to do more than anything. I also try to keep things every family friendly for the most part. I know it's dark content, so there are certain things that you can't keep family friendly, but I try to keep it PG when it comes to language and everything else, so that way more people can listen. And I've heard from a lot of people saying that they actually appreciate that. Because that way they can listen at work or they can listen at home. I hear so many times from parents saying that they share it with their kids when they're listening with their kids. I
Oh,
think
that's nice.
the one about the axe murder and how they killed all five of their kids, and you're listening to that with your kids. Oh yeah, they love that kind of stuff. Okay, but
Teach their own, right?
right, yeah. I've heard from people saying that they're one couple who are now getting married say their very first date was listening to Weird Darkness,
Oh,
which
that's
is the
cute.
strangest concept for a first date. It's sweet to me. I love it, which is why I tell the story. But it's like, seriously, and she was okay with you planning that for a first date? But apparently so, and it works. So, in fact, one of these days somebody's going to come to me and they're going to say, "Will you marry us?" Because I am, I did go online and get myself uh,
Oh,
get myself a reverend license. So sure enough, one of these people are going to come to me and say, "You know what? You ought to marry us since we met through you."
I
Um,
mean, if anyone's watching this and also listens to your podcast, there's your
uh,
opportunity to ask.
yeah, and I don't mind traveling. It's fun. Uh, Something else that I have found is pretty interesting is in the group, I will post polls on a somewhat regular basis, and
Mhm.
I will ask people. Uh, I'll give them a list of the stories that I'm planning on using in an episode, and I'll say, "What do you guys think should be the top story? Like, which one's going to make it into the title, or what we call a headliner?" And even though it's something small and it doesn't take just a couple of minutes to create that, people really like the idea that they are contributing to what's going to be in the podcast. So in fact, some of them, once in a while, I'll let people even suggest their own titles. I've also done a poll where I sort of flipped it, and I will list all the titles, but I'll also add one that is not going to be in the show, and I call it "Identify the Imposter." And so you tell me, of all of these stories that are going to be in this episode tonight, which one's not going to be in the episode? Which one did I just make up? And they have fun with that as well. And of course, that gets them engaged, and it gives them sort of more of that buy-in to listen in, because they won't know until they actually listen to the podcast which story does not make it into the show. And at the beginning of the episode, I'll just do a little music bed saying, "Hey, if you played Identify the Imposter in the Facebook group, here is the title that didn't make it." But also in the podcast, that gives people who aren't in the group, they listen to that going, "That sounded kind of weird. Let me go check out that Facebook group." So it gives them sort of a double cross promotion kind of thing, I guess, for lack of better words. So again, it's not just posting a link to the podcast; it's giving people a reason to engage. I've also found the headliner videos are quite effective as well, where you click. I just take a little snippet from one of my episodes and post it. Say, "Hey, if you want to hear the rest of the episode, click the link." Even though that's more just posting the episode, it's something a little bit more visually engaging than just a link and static image. And I think that works as well. Just get creative and just do things that aren't just posting a link to your episode. I think that's what people just find that annoying more than anything else. You got to be yourself. You got to be engaged.
100%. I think that's super important. So, I mean, we talked a lot about the Facebook group, but I'm sure that you're trying to develop your community somewhere else. Do you have a newsletter? Do you engage with your community there? Do you do Instagram? Or I don't know, you have a Patreon as well. So maybe also let's talk about some other places that you are, or have you just realized that Facebook groups really work with your audience very well, and you just kind of focus on there?
I mostly focus on Facebook. I am on Instagram, but I never really understood the Instagram aspect for podcasters, because everything for us is audio. That's what we're promoting. I find it hard to. I have a mental block when it comes to Instagram. I have somebody helping me with that because I know my limitations. But I also know that there's a huge audience on Instagram that we could possibly be reaching. It's just I don't know how to reach them very well. So I ask other people to help me with that. Because you can't even post links really in Instagram. You can only on your profile, they can click that one link to take you to your website or whatever.
Actually, you can do it in stories now. You can add links in stories
See,
as
I'm an
well.
idiot. See, I don't know about that. I don't. And stories. Well, I don't know how to do stories, so I'm gonna have to find out. But thank you for letting me know. Now I have to look into it. Thank you so much for giving me
No
more work to
problem.
do. I really appreciate it. That's what I needed. But
But
I'm also on Twitter and everything else.
Mhm.
I forgot what your question was again.
The newsletter, do you have a newsletter as
Newsletter,
well, or
newsletter. Thank you. I have been building the newsletter for years
Mhm.
and have done nothing with it. Um,
Okay.
until recently. Until recently. Again, it's mostly time.
Yeah.
I think something we've not talked about is I post daily, 7 days a week, sometimes more. Because on the weekends I'll do archive episodes where I can actually post a couple of them, and I also do some other like an old time radio episode on Sundays,
Mhm.
which is still Weird Darkness genre, but it's old time radio. Um, so I'm so busy creating the content, I didn't have really time to work on
Distribute it.
to distribute all this stuff. Right. So with the newsletter, I had been building the list for a long time. The link had been on my site. So, hey, sign up for the free newsletter and stay up to date. Well, there was no up to date for years. But recently, again, I had to reach out to somebody and help me with it, because you cannot do it all on your own
Yeah.
sometimes. If
I think
if you're posting daily, you know, I want to do what I know I can do well. And so I create the content. I know I'm not going to do well with a newsletter. It's just not in me. So I have somebody else helping me with that. But I have found, in fact, I was just talking to them the other day, it's not really the engagement with the audience that the newsletter helps me with. It's more the advertisers, because I put in my latest advertisers are here,
Mm.
and they check them out, and be sure to use this promo code such and such, such and such. And I ended up getting yearly buys for 2022 from 3 different advertisers who are advertising at least once a month. And all I can think of is they liked what they heard in the podcast. And I think the newsletter is probably helping to get the word out.
Mhm. Interesting.
It's a very surprising thing. I did not expect it. I expected to use the newsletter to engage with people, maybe sell T-shirts, stuff like that. Um, Maybe once in a while write an article for the newsletter, something that is not in the podcast. But I found that the advertisers seem to benefit some way. I don't have any proof that that's actually the case, but I can kind of see the timeline as to what
Mhm.
happened when, and I kind of think that it's been a benefit for them.
I think for the weirdos, I think that when you were building your content, I think what's really stands out to me is that like when you're creating a community of people, of listeners, a loyal community, you need to love what you're saying, and you need to be love the subject that you're talking about, and it needs to come through in your content. And I think that you posting, 7 times a week, 7 times a day, 7 times a
It
week,
feels that
sorry.
way sometimes. It does.
And really having that content and that quality and that passion come through, I think it also is very magnetic for people, and that people start listening and they kind of get hooked on it, and they
Mhm.
realize that passion, and the fact that you make yourself so available. I think when you're saying in your Facebook groups, or when you do meet and greets, or you go out and talk to people, and I feel you're very approachable as an individual as well. And I think that
Thank you.
also creates a great connection, that has people coming back and talking, and really kind of sharing the news of your podcast, because they like you as a person and your personality and also your content.
Yeah, and I would reiterate, just like many other podcasters do, that in your podcast you politely ask your listeners to share it with their
Mhm.
friends, family on social media. I have actually found that actually is helpful. It seems so cliche at first, and I wanted to avoid what people were saying on other podcasts, because I wanted
Yeah.
to be different. But I really feel the more people that came to me say, "Hey, we've been telling our sister or our family about this, or our friends at school," without me saying it, I
Yeah.
know, hey, people actually do want to share what they enjoy.
Yeah,
So if you just
exactly.
kind of give them that reminder, hey, if you would, it's rather than saying leave a rating and review, which I just started doing again. But I realized more important is the sharing. I like the ratings and reviews, but I would much rather have, instead of another review, I'd rather have another listener.
Yeah.
And so
It's
just
it's word of mouth, right?
ru-
I think
it
that
is the
people.
best advertising. You cannot buy word of mouth.
Mhm.
And you're right, it is so powerful. And
But
another
it
way,
takes time. I think a lot of people don't realize that word of mouth takes time.
it does, but it's also but it's I think it's the most effective, because you are going to listen to a friend or a family member say, you ought to try this. You're going to listen to that a lot more closely than when you hear a promo on somebody else's podcast saying, hey, here's this podcast, come listen to my podcast, or seeing a
Mhm.
TV commercial or whatever. It's just so much powerful because you have that personal connection, which I
Definitely.
also think helps when it comes at the end of the podcast. Sometimes I'll do something called the Chamber of Comments, which is just my version of answering emails and stuff like that. And that's where I can actually be even more personable, because telling dark stories, that's one thing, but that doesn't really bring out all your personality the way that I do it. Because I script everything out. I'm more of a narrator
Yeah.
rather than a personality when it
Mhm.
comes to the show. Until the email section, until I get to the Chamber of Comments, because then I can say, "Hey, you know what? I really appreciate that email. It sounds like you're really hurting. I'm really sorry. You know what? I'm glad that I'm there with you during your hard times. And I created the Hope in the Darkness page for people who have trouble with depression and anxiety and stuff like that. And I'll mention that once in a while. But it gives me an opportunity to use my own personality and kind of talk back to them, even if it's just an email rather than a conversation like you and I are having.
Yeah.
It's still, and it shows them that they are important to me. I read every single email I receive. I may not be able to reply to all of them. I try, but it can get difficult. But I do tell people I read them all. And if you're giving me something engaging, something interesting, I'll put it into the podcast and do it that way. And again, it's that personal buy-in. They hear their
Yeah.
name, they hear their email, or once a month I do something called Fireside Frights, which is just nothing but stories that they've sent me. And
Oh, that's,
so
yeah, that's
and
really
so they will tune in for that particular episode, knowing there's a good possibility that I'm going to use their story, no matter how bad that story might be. Um, I try to fix them up, with the English and English and grammar and everything to make them listenable. I can't tell you how annoying it is sometimes. People just talking to their phone. There's no punctuation. There is no capitalization. It's just one long 3,000 word sentence, and I'm supposed to make something out of that. So
and
thank
yet you
God for
do.
digital editing. Do what?
And yet you make something out of
I
it. There
try.
you go.
I try.
Because you try. That's the thing. I think that's also a really great point that you bring up, is that people want to feel like they're being heard, that they're being listened to, that they're connecting, and that people are, there is that connection. And
Mhm.
doing all these little things, they help, and they really solidify your listenership and your community. And very quickly, I think that it's really interesting, because I think authenticity and also connecting, with the mental health issues that you said that you have. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's also a great way of showing like your vulnerabilities, your authenticity, and also connecting on a cause that you believe in, and that that you can work with others and talk to them. And I want you to describe or talk a little bit more about that.
About my hope in the darkness.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's the page that I created on the website, and on that page there are several resources for people if they struggle with depression, or if they're with suicidal thoughts or addiction or whatever. The reason I started doing that is, one, I suffer from depression. I have since I was a teenager, although I didn't realize it until I became an adult what it is that I was suffering from. But I also realized with the dark content that I'm producing, I'm guessing a lot of people who like dark content have dark tendencies. And I have found that actually to be the case. It was a guess at the beginning. And I just put it out there. All I did was just say, hey, if you're having suicidal thoughts, here's a phone number. And I actually had a few people saying, thank you so much for putting that there. I really appreciate it. And that gave me the idea that, okay, if there's 10 people that have said that, there's probably 1,000 who have not said it, but they still think it. So I created that page specifically for that reason. And it has sort of grown. People, again, it's another one of those connecting points, which it wasn't intended to be, but people are being heard, as you mentioned. That's a great way of putting it. They feel that there's somebody that understands where they're coming from. That's not just trying to give them advice like, oh, just watch it, just go watch a comedy movie, you'll be fine, or just shake it off, you'll feel better in the morning. People who don't go through depression think they have good advice, but they really don't understand. And so for somebody like me who does deal with it and understands where they're coming from, I think it gives them that much more of the community feel. In fact, we were saying earlier that I call my fans weirdos. I actually say weirdo family quite a bit, because that's really the way it feels sometimes. Not only will I talk about it in the podcast, especially in the Chamber of Comments section when I'm answering people's emails, because that can get pretty deep. But even in the Facebook group, people will say, "Hey, you know what? I'm having a tough day today," and it's odd because there's funny meme, link to a podcast, and then suddenly I'm hurting, and it's amazing how many people. So with 105,000 people in the group now, it's amazing how many replies will come into that, and 99% of them are, hey, I understand you. I'm really sorry that you're going through that. I'll be praying for you today, which I love. Being a Christian, I love it when people are open enough to say, I will be praying for you today. um so there is that community there as well. They feel welcomed. They feel safe in that group. They're not, unlike some other places where they might post and say, hey, I'm struggling today. And people are going to give you that bad advice just because they think they're giving you good advice. They actually know that there are people who understand them, and they can go there just for community, for lack of anything else. So I think that's another part of why it grew so fast, because
Yeah.
not only do they like the content of the podcast, but they also like what it represents. And we do a fundraiser every single year for organizations that help people that struggle with depression, and people really get behind that. We do it once a year for a month in October, and this last year we raised over $6,000, which is
Wow.
amazing to me. We've never done that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. In years past, we were lucky to break 2,000, so to triple that this year really blew me away. And it's just amazing when I'll get emails back from the people that we do give money to, and they'll say, wow, where did this come from? Thank you so much. And I'll
Yeah.
say, this is from the Weirdo family. It's not from the Weird Darkness podcast. This is from the listeners
Weirdo
of
family.
Weird Darkness. And I do the same thing with the merchandise that I sell, the CBD oils that I sell, the Weird Dark roast coffee that I sell. All of those profits also go towards the organizations that help people with depression.
And
So,
I think that's great because when someone's purchasing something, they feel like they're giving back.
mhm,
And I think that's super important that it's not just a podcast, it's a family, it's somewhere where you feel safe, it's somewhere where you can have conversations that you might not have with maybe with your friends and your family,
right,
your regular family, right? You might have
right,
these dark thoughts and you're maybe afraid to talk to your family. You come to your weirdo family and they'll be able to understand where you're coming through. And I think creating that is amazing. And I think that it's so much deeper than just a podcast. It's really just what you've done is amazing.
well,
And I think it's
thank you.
such a great example of how much and you can do what you
Yeah,
can do and how far you can go and how many lives you can touch with the podcast. And I think that's
yeah,
amazing.
I was actually talking to my bride, a few months ago, and I told her, "This really doesn't even feel like a podcast anymore, it feels like a ministry." Um, uh, and being church people, we kind of
Yeah.
understood where we were coming from,
Yeah.
because even though I'm not writing a sermon every week and doing that type of thing, but it really is that with people coming to you with problems,
Mhm.
and they're not expecting you to fix their problems. They just want somebody to listen, somebody to understand.
Yeah.
And we do that, but so having the entertainment aspect and also the personal uh ministry aspect, for lack of better words, I think it's just been a great combination. And so even though there are
Yeah.
other podcasts that are doing some similar content, I mean, there's only just so many weird stories out there, like of true crime or whatever, or paranormal, I mean, how many times are you going to talk about Mothman or Jeffrey Dahmer? Everybody's, touched on it in some way, shape, or form, but they come here because, one, hopefully they like uh, the presentation of it, and the fact that I'm a professional voice artist rather than just talking one-on-one with somebody in a microphone in somebody's garage and just going back and forth.
Mhm.
But also the aspect of the community, and that there's just one more, I hate this term, but one more bullet in the gun,
Yeah.
for reaching them.
Yeah.
So I yeah, it's weird. It's weird that I call it a ministry, but it does kind of feel that way.
I mean, it's amazing. And I think a lot of people can look at the example that you have and really try to not emulate it in their own way because copying you have to put your own spin, your own personality,
Absolutely.
your own way into it when you're creating your community. And so I kind of want to end with this one question. If you were going to give advice to a new podcaster out there, let's say they're just starting out their podcast and they're struggling finding listeners and like, oh my gosh, no one's listening. How am I going to get my listeners up? Like, how am I going to
Uh,
create my community? Like, what is going on?
because everybody has those questions. Every single
Everyone
person that
does.
starts, yeah, so many people have that. Well, yeah, I mean that's part of the challenge. If
What's your
anybody,
advice to them?
well,
Go.
first I tell them, please don't get into podcasting because I don't need the competition. But once I get past that and they realize it's just a joke, um, I tell them, well, more than anything, you have to enjoy what you're making. This is not a sprint. This definitely is. I know it's cliche to say that this is a marathon, but it really is. Um, like we started. I started this in 2015,
Yeah.
and it wasn't until 2020 that it really took off.
Wow.
So you're not doing it at the beginning just because you want money or you want fame or whatever other reason there might be in your head. You can't go into it thinking that way. There are a few people that it does, it's a flash in the pan for them, and they're an overnight success, and kudos to them.
Yeah.
But if you want to be realistic, know that this is going to be a long haul. So you'd better darn well like what you create, because in the beginning, you're the only person that's going to be consuming it. Maybe your family and friends, because they're nice to you, but they're not going to give you honest feedback. They're going to say, "Oh, wow, that was awesome. Yeah, you did a great job." Don't believe them. You know, well, have confidence in what you do, but don't just take that at face value.
Yeah.
But that is where your community is going to start, though, is your friends and family. So even though they're going to sugarcoat everything with you, they're still the ones that are going to follow you on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and they're the ones that are going to share at the beginning. So I think that's something that it's sort of something you kind of have to do if you
Mhm.
want a social following. If I was to start over completely, I would immediately start with a group, even though I didn't start with one.
Okay.
Um, Nowadays, especially because that seems to be, I would still do the page, just because it's sort of the business side of it. But the group really has built the community, and especially nowadays on Facebook, groups are so much more engaging than the pages are. You can do a profile, but you're only limited to what Facebook changes things every other day, so it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on now. But for
Yeah.
a while, you could only have 5,000 friends, and then now you can add the 5,000 friends, but people can follow you on your profile. But that's your personal profile. That's not. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're starting a Facebook account for the sole purpose of doing your podcast there, create the page, create the groups, and get involved. You can't like we mentioned earlier, don't just
Mhm.
post a link and then come back the next time you post an episode and say, hey, here's another one. You need to be on there on a regular basis. And
Every day.
hmm,
Every day, right?
I do. I do. Um, Sometimes I feel that Facebook is the bane of my existence just because it takes so much time. But it has been extremely important in growing the group. If they know that you're looking at their posts in the group, if they know that you're liking them, if you're the one, if you're commenting on them saying, "Hey, that was really funny," or "Boy, I can relate to that. That's totally
Mhm.
me," and they see that little icon that it's you, the podcaster that they listen to is the one that replied to that. That's powerful. I mean, how many of us would love to get on Twitter and find out that Steven Spielberg is following us? So, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that is just the most awesome thing ever. How does he even know I exist?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not Steven Spielberg by any way, shape, or form, but in some people's minds, if they listen daily to the podcast, I am at least somewhat of a celebrity in their eyes, in their mind. And so for me to reply, it makes it special for them. And that's going to build loyalty too. Because they might actually tell somebody, hey, you know what? The host from Weird Darkness, he actually commented on my post today. That was pretty cool. And maybe that person they're talking to has no idea what Weird Darkness is. And what is Weird Darkness? Oh, it's this really cool podcast. You ought to check it out.
Yeah.
I think that personal connection really is important. So even though it's time consuming, and you don't keep your Facebook tabs open all day long on your computer, because it will suck your time away and you'll get nothing done. But that being said, it's still important to go in there at least once a day. Give yourself a good 10 or 15 minutes to go through all of the posts and see what people are saying. That's also a good point, a good opportunity to clean it up too, because a lot of people aren't going to want the F-bomb and everything else in there. So you'll still want to keep it. You want to monitor that as well as engage,
And also
to try to
realize
keep
at
it
the
a safe
beginning.
community.
Oh, sorry.
No, so
Also
I'm trying to keep it a safe place, is all I'm saying.
Also realize that at the beginning, when you create your Facebook page or Facebook group, you're probably going to be just talking to yourself for a while,
Right,
posting, and no one's responding. And don't get too discouraged, disencouraged, discouraged about that. And just keep going. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Uh, Even the big people, even the very successful podcasters out there started small. They started very
right,
slowly. It took a while. It was a lot of talking to no one. It was a lot of messaging friends and family, being like, share it, share my podcast,
right,
and really developing that. But I think what you've shown is that if you stick with it, and if you're authentic, and you really, have heart and soul, and if you connect and really have a conversation and not just throw episodes out over time, 5 years, you said that it took, it will get to where you want it to get. And the
right.
underlying thing is passion for what you're talking about. And I think that's really important. If your idea is, I want to make money from, I want to make, $5,000 per month in 3 months,
Good luck with that.
it's not going to happen.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah, not unless you're filthy rich and you can pour a lot of money into advertising, at which point you really don't care about $5,000 a month.
Yeah.
Um,
There you go.
but you have a good point though regarding the posting, and you might be the only one seeing them
Yeah.
when you're posting. Very same thing for when somebody creates a podcast. A lot of people will recommend you have at least 5 episodes or something that are posted before you make the big launch and tell everybody, "Hey, come check out my podcast." You want something there for them to consume. Otherwise, they're not going to come back. If you tell
Yeah.
me about a new podcast and I see one episode, I might listen to that one episode, but then there's nothing else to listen to. There's nothing else to engage with. I might just unsubscribe at that point, just because I don't want it clogging up my feed of everything else that I'm listening to.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, when it comes to the Facebook groups and the pages and stuff like that, Twitter, whatever, have posts there, even if you know that there's nobody listening or reading your stuff in the beginning. If you have the stuff there for them to see, they'll at least know that you are being engaged, that you're engaging. It's not just a page you created and then hoping people are going to come to. They see
Yeah.
that you are actually connected to it, that you're invested in it, and the just the more you can give them to see or listen to before when they first find you, I think is the better.
Perfect.
So
Well,
yeah,
on that note, we're going to end our conversation here. Now, if anyone who is listening to this, not listening, watching, whew, too much podcasting
I know.
talk.
Now you know why I got away from YouTube. I can't do videos. I keep saying audio, listening.
If anyone watching wants to check out your podcast, your website, your Facebook group, where can they find you?
You can find everything. And this is something else I also recommend to podcasters, that they have a website for their podcast. So you can put anything and everything there. So if you go to weirddarkness.com, you can see tabs for each of the individual shows that I put together. The Hope in the Darkness page. There's the contact page, which has all of my social media and my email addresses and everything else. Anything and everything that you could possibly need to know about the podcast is on the website. And again, that's something else that takes a lot of time to put together and maintain, but it's
Yeah,
totally worth it.
worth it.
So yeah, if people just go to weirddarkness.com, they can find everything that they are looking for. And of course, wherever you're listening to podcasts, just search for Weird Darkness. I'm everywhere on. Most people are saying, "Are you on Spotify?" Yes, I'm on Spotify. Yes. Are you sure? Because not every. Yes, I'm sure. Trust me. Trust me. Spreaker takes good care of me. Yes, I'm there. So yeah, just search for Weird Darkness or go to weirddarkness.com. You can get anything and everything you need.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I hope anyone is watching has gotten a lot of great tips and tricks on how to build a community and how to create your own weirdo family, obviously with different branding, but your own
Please. Yes.
podcast family. Thank you so much for chatting with us. And until next time, bye, guys.